Don't stop.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining me on the Everything and Anything and a Bit Gay podcast. I'm your host, Zach Randles-Friedman. Today, I am not doing one of my campy, fun stories that are a bit gay. I'm doing a really kind of serious story today that you're going to hear. My guest today is a true inspiration. She is a top survivor of the people I've interviewed. She has done so much with what she's been put through, and she has turned it around. You know, I am an independent media voice, and I've been thinking a lot lately about the stories that are out there that are getting lost. We live in a constant news cycle, whether you're getting notifications on your phone for news, whether you're checking your email, whether you're going to 24-hour news cycles on television, or you're going to websites to see what's happening. It's constant. It's the Epstein files. It's the war in Iran. It's us saying that we're holding off on Iran. It's TSA lines, and then we go back to gas prices, and then we're going back to the Epstein files, but then we're trying to ignore the Epstein files because we don't want to talk about what they're really about. And these elite people are trying to give us so much news, and they're trying to guide us from a place where they just don't want us to go. They don't want us to be educated. We all know what's in the Epstein files. Melania Trump did a speech this week saying she was not she didn't know Epstein that well, and she barely knew him. But yet there are pictures all over the internet of her and Jeffrey Epstein together. There's all this evidence that you can see. I could not even understand what she was saying. And the president is married to this woman, but yet he hates immigrants. He hates immigrants. He doesn't want anybody coming to this country. But this woman has lived here for 30 years, and she still can barely speak English. I mean, what is wrong with this country? There's so much double standards. Like, your wife is an immigrant. Move away from hating immigrants. Like, it's insanity to me. But what we're not actually sitting here saying is a lot about the human trafficking aspect of this. We're talking about Jeffrey Epstein, how he did human trafficking, and we're focusing more on what Donald Trump did as part of that with Epstein, but there's a much bigger story. I don't think we're going that deep, but today we are. We're not asking uncomfortable questions, but today we're going to talk about some of those with my guest. And we're definitely not talking about things that actually matter the most. And that's why this episode is different. My guest today, Kim Kelley, opened up more than I expected her to. Kim is not just a guest of mine. She is a survivor. She was born and raised in one of the most notorious cults in the entire world. This isn't something that you read about. This isn't something that she researched. This is something that she lived. She lived through abuse, manipulation, isolation, and things most of us could not even comprehend. Things that most of us probably couldn't survive a week of, that she survived her entire life of. And what struck me the most wasn't what she went through. It's what she's doing about that now and how she is helping people now. Because instead of letting that define her about what happened to her and break her, it's the opposite. She turned her life into doing something powerful. She is now actively fighting child trafficking. She founded Digital Defenders United, and she works directly with law enforcement agencies. She trains them, she educates them, and she helps them understand what this actually looks like in the real world. Because the truth is, a lot of people don't understand it. A lot of people don't want to understand it. It's a very uncomfortable subject. It's dark. It forces you to confront realities that most of us would rather not even think about. Nobody wants to think about children being sexually trafficked. But Kim doesn't have that luxury. She has seen it, she's lived it, and now she's doing something about it. In this episode, we go deep, like really, really deep. We don't just stay surface level. We don't talk about her story and move on. We talk about things that people are thinking about but don't always say out loud. What should actually happen to people who traffic children? We talk about that. What should happen to people who sexually abuse children? We talk about that. And let's be honest. We hear about these crimes and we act emotionally and we say, that's horrible. And then we move on to the next story. But we don't talk about the consequences. We don't talk about justice in a real, tangible way. In this conversation, we go there. We talk about things like chemical castration. We talk about a lifetime in solitary confinement. We talk about accountability, what accountability should actually look like for people who commit these type of crimes. And it's uncomfortable. And it should be uncomfortable. And maybe you're not going to agree with all the things that we say in this podcast episode. But because it's uncomfortable, we're going to make you pay attention. This episode is not like the rest of my content. It's heavier, it's raw, it's more real, but it's also one of the most important conversations that I've had. Because at the end of the day, this isn't about Kim's story. It's about what's still happening out there right now. It's about the fact that child trafficking is not some distant issue. It's not something that only happens somewhere else. It's happening here. It's happening in this country. It's happening in ways we don't fully understand. And there are people like Kim who are out there every single day trying to stop it. And if you don't take anything away from this episode, I hope this makes you pay attention. I hope this makes you ask questions and you don't just move on to the next headline. Because the stories like this matter the most and are usually the ones that avoid. And Kim Kelley, she is not just a survivor. She is someone who turned an unimaginable pain into purpose. And honestly, she is a huge inspiration. I hope you enjoyed this episode with Kim Kelley. I think this is going to resonate with a lot of people. Share the episode. Let's get the word out there about what Kim's doing. Let's get the word out there beyond the headlines. This is more than a headline. This is about a real life person who went through a horrible childhood and now has turned that and is helping people around the world. And she's helping to stop human trafficking. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you enjoy my interview with Kim Kelley. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining me on the Everything and Anything at a Bit Gay podcast. Today, I have a guest, and her name is Kim Kelley, and she has a super interesting history, background, and what she's doing today. So welcome to the show, Kim.
Thank you so much for having me.
So for people who are meeting you for the first time, how do you kind of define who you are today?
Depends who the person is and what they want them to know about me. For your audience. So today I work at a government and law enforcement training facility. We're doing a lot to combat child exploitation and trafficking, which I can get more into. In terms of my background, I was born and raised into one of the most notorious cults in the world. That's not a flex. It's just for context because cults can do a lot of things. This was an international religious, actually Christian cult. My mother was one of the top leaders. So this cult is infamous for all of the worst things imaginable to children, including child trafficking, words I probably shouldn't use on your platform. So all that to say, I have a very informed stance on this subject, and I do a lot to educate not only the professionals, but also the public to help them understand their real problems as well as the real solutions.
So let's talk about the cult first. And then I have a lot of questions for you about your work that you're doing today, because I'm assuming that helped influence how you got to where you are today.
For sure.
So you were born into the cult, or your mother became part of the cult?
My mother decided to join the cult when she was in her 20s. Fast forward, I have 4 older siblings. We were all born and raised all over the world. My mom is from Dallas, Texas. I was actually born in Brazil, raised mostly in Brazil and Mexico. So for the first 20 years of my life, that's all I knew. We did not really have access to the outside world.
What was the name of the cult?
It started in the late 60s as the Children of God. It later rebranded to the Family or Family of Love Family, and then Family International.
So I have done an interview with someone that was part of this as well. Siblings, inter-siblings.
That's super interesting. You know, there was a lot of us. There was around 25,000 children affected by this. And this is by no means a flex. There's a uniqueness in myself, my siblings, and a few select others born and raised in this cult. For context, you know, there's the first generation who decided to join, and that was their choice. There was the second and even third generation born and raised in this cult, no access to the outside world. And as you can imagine, brainwashing is incredibly powerful on children. That being said, my mother was actually one of the top leaders. And what that means, not a flex, it means you have to be the most evil and psychotic to essentially earn that place. There were all different ranks, both locally, and I'm not going to get into that, but on the top international level, there was definitely a nucleus of leadership that was very secretive and very much like a cult within a cult. So myself, my siblings, and a few other kids had a very unique insider perspective of the leadership, and there's a whole lot to unpack there.
And we'll be right back. Okay, and now back to the show. And what does a day-to-day look like in being in this cult when you're a kid?
I mean, it really depends on the day, but in general, like, we weren't allowed to have any, I can't relate to anything about a normal childhood, let's put it that way.
Okay.
So we were raised in compounds. It was very structured and disciplined, which I'm not saying is inherently bad, but, much more structured than a childhood should be, obviously. So
Yeah.
very intensive rules and schedules and all those things. A lot of work, which we now call child labor. Of course, we didn't have those terms at the time. There was a lot of labor trafficking as well as other forms of trafficking, right? So we were homeschooled in these group school type things. And again, this was around the time I was born. These compounds had between 50 to like 150 people. So as you can imagine, families were often separated. People didn't really have individuality, autonomy. You're definitely not encouraged to ask questions or have critical thinking. And it was all, in our case, very centered around Jesus. So cult joke, I can sing the Bible to you in 3 languages. We had at least 2 hours a day of mandatory reading, and this was either the Bible or cult publications. So beyond the cult indoctrination, religion, and all of that, and we did, at least in the first 10 years of my life, we had some structure around schooling, dark humor. Yeah. We obviously, did not have much access to the outside world, except when we were out there fundraising. And just for context, a bunch of little white American kids in countries all around the world busking and, fundraising for this cult.
And the other interview that I did, they sent them out basically to fundraise at a certain age, like late teens, I think, or something. Is that what happened with
we were children? No,
you were children. Okay, maybe it was children.
Like I said, everyone's experience is a little bit different. In our case, I mean, I've got pictures. I was 5 and 6, and there was a kid that was like 4 in the front. The cute kid concept.
That's insane.
Absolutely. And for context, on the streets of Brazil, I have an incredibly vivid memory, which is both a blessing and a curse. But thankfully, real dark, sarcastic humor, as people can tell. That's a disclaimer, not an apology, right? I think lashing is the biggest middle finger you can give to your abusers. I think it's also the healthiest form of release. But that being said, it was not a childhood I would wish on any kid.
So was there physical, sexual, all those different abuses that were happening in this cult?
Absolutely. And, unlike a lot of different child exploitation environments, there's a lot of evidence online about this particular cult. I will say a lot of the documentaries and interviews and media were from outsiders who didn't really know what questions to ask. So there's pieces of the picture, if you will. It's much bigger, and I would say even worse, possibly, than, what you see the glimpses of online. That being said, there's people all over the world that had different experiences. And like I said, leadership had a tier of its own, if you will.
At the beginning, you said your mother was one of the more evil people because you have to be a leader. I'm assuming you don't have a relationship with your mother and she's still in the cult if she's alive?
I don't have a relationship with my mother. I have been no contact for over a decade. I say that not because mommy issues or because she was, unloving to myself and my siblings. I say that because she literally wrote the book of child abuse that impacted the childhood of over at least tens of thousands of children. So again, you could pick a very justifiable reasons from any of my siblings or myself into this person was not a safe parent, right? But again, because of the influence she had in her leadership role and because of her position somehow in child education and development, she had a very instrumental role specific to the abuse of tens of thousands of children. All in the name of Jesus, by the way.
And is it just because she was brainwashed at one point? I'm just trying to understand how somebody gets there. How somebody gets there to that point where they think it's okay to do this to children or to write, to create these policies about this is okay to do to these children or to ruin this many thousands of lives. How does somebody get there?
It's such a logical question. I'm going to have to request that people don't think logically in order to understand it, because there's no justifiable reason, as you can imagine, for someone making these kooky decisions. Now, I'm pretty good at oversimplifying things for the sake of clarity, right? So I'm going to run 2 analogies by you.
Okay.
One is it's one thing for an adult to make a kooky decision with their life, like to join a cult, okay? Free country, right?
Yeah.
Very different level of responsibility when you start having children in these environments, right? By then, you should probably think a little differently, right? Now, there's very effective brainwashing that we know many examples of throughout history on adults. It's very different when you're born and raised under the rock. And you're told from the day you're born that red is blue. And every book you're allowed to read, every picture on the wall, every song, every single person in your existence reinforces this belief that red is blue. So that's your norm as you grow up, a child who's a sponge, and that's how you grew up in your environment, right? The other aspect of this that I could not explain brainwashing to you in an hour. I can summarize it, of course. I can oversimplify something that's quite complex. But again, lots of examples in history of how effective it is on adults. To your point, though, okay, cults, again, is something I would probably take a whole series to unpack all the layers of. I wrote something late one night that occurred to me just seamlessly. I'm going to read it to you. It's called The 10 Rules of Every Cult, because I've run this by a lot of subject matter experts and no one's had anything to add to this. So it's quite a great summary.
Yeah.
Number one, this explains, to answer your question, how could someone do something so evil and psychotic? Well, it's a process. Rule number one, they must not know. Cults have layers. The outer public layer is a lot like a corporate brochure with happy smiling people and we love Jesus and we're, in our case, Christian missionaries. Great. Number two, it is written. Take it by faith. So you see where religion and God said so comes into play here, right? Number three, we are the only ones who are right. So God gave us this special truth or gift or freedom and nobody else can handle it, but we're the chosen ones. So we have this special insider information from God, who, by the way, wants us to abuse children because that's Jesus's love. Okay. Number five, this is what's best. They literally thought it was God's highest will. It was Jesus's love. Yes. Number six is recruit. Full stop. Number seven, you must earn your place. Participation is not optional. That's so important for people to realize when we're looking at leadership who's acting dumb about things going on and pretending like they're not guilty. You must earn your place. You might also imagine how these same patterns play out in a lot of society today. Interesting. So number eight, support. By whatever means necessary. For most of them, financial contributions are a priority, and those who give the most money have the most freedom or power within their cult. So they'll bend the rules for the people donating the most. Number nine, dedication. Do whatever it takes. Even that's forsaking your family, your friends, your children. God's highest will. Enduring endless pain and discomfort. God's highest will. Number 10, if you're not for us, you're against us. So I could unpack so much more from that. But to answer your question, like, how could somebody from an outsider world, by the way, my mom's from Dallas, Texas. She was a Dallas Cowboy cheerleader. She was attending UT when some Jesus-loving hippies offered her free hugs and, an escape from her world. And again, deciding to do something kooky with your life when you have context of what blue truly is. And then you start having children and teaching them that red is blue, okay? I'm using a very harmless analogy, but you can imagine how harmful these actual God's love is abusing children. They didn't use those words at the time. It was masked with all kinds of, pretty language and religious text about God's highest will. So to answer your question, I think you have to be both evil and psychotic to understand, to enact that. But to also answer your question, there's a process that now we call grooming, or essentially manipulation.
Yeah.
Getting people to slowly and surely believe in something to the point that they will allow their kids to be abused in the name of God if they think it's God's highest will.
Did your mom meet your father in the cult?
They did. Now, this was obviously before I was born. This is what I've been told. So the disclaimer is, who knows the truth? I was told they were essentially paired in an arranged marriage, which makes sense because at the time that's what happened, and just sort of sent off to Europe, at the time. So again, this was in the late 60s or maybe early 70s then.
And are you in contact with your father, or is he still part of the cult as well?
No. And again, okay, I could write a whole book about healing. I'm going to summarize something real quick, okay?
Okay.
You didn't ask this, but a lot of people, I'm not recommending this cutting off your parents thing for family drama and mommy issues, right? There's a very level, imagine being Ghislaine Maxwell's daughter, right? Super different level of impact. And again, not just me personally, but to way too many children. So that being said, I'm at complete peace with the healthy, appropriate detachment that I have from these evil, psychotic people. Do I wish I had parents? I used to, yes. Can this people who are incapable of being parents replace the parents I should have had? No, right? So I've made complete peace. And again, like you see, I have this dark humor. It's a genuine smile, right? Talking about this stuff doesn't make me sad or cry. And to your point, it's a big fuel for the purpose that I have today. So I'm happy that I've been able to make peace with the fact that I don't have parents, and that's okay, right? Unfortunately, there's a lot of my peers who are still struggling with how to even deal with their parents. Now, a lot of them have children of their own, right? It's a really difficult thing to understand the process of healing. I think that in summary, healing is a choice. As difficult as that is, that puts the responsibility and the power back in our hands. It also means you're the only one that can allow yourself to heal and decide the extent to which you allow yourself to heal. So for me, healing is peace and happiness. And like I said, I'm honored to be part of the solution and what I'm doing today to fight back.
And what about your siblings? Are you in touch with any of them?
Yeah, absolutely. My siblings and I are very close.
And so can you tell me how you got out of it, how you escaped this?
Absolutely. It wasn't like a Hollywood heroic story, right? So by now, all right, summarizing my childhood, again, born in Brazil. I was there for about 8 years, lived in Mexico for the most of the rest of my childhood. I was in Houston, Texas for about 4 years of my childhood. That being said, fast forward, I'm 19 years old. So, I'm technically an adult by now. The cult had changed a lot, and I'd have to unpack a lot of that history. But the point is that it started in the late 60s. My older siblings suffered some of the worst possible abuse. And again, within the realms of leadership, it was much worse than many. That being said, around the time I was born, although we were still living in compound homes, etc., there was a series of international raids, which did not have the happy ending you would expect from that. And I've talked about that story many times. But to get to the point of your question, that kind of awareness, or let's call it negative publicity, or what they called religious persecution, what it did do, because awareness reduces the predator's ability to operate. It makes it harder for bad guys to get away with doing bad things to children when we, the people, are aware and willing to intervene, right? Now, unfortunately, those raids, which is a whole story in itself, did not result in one adult getting convicted.
Wow.
Or one child being rescued, right? They returned all the children back into these compounds. Okay, crazy corruption there. Let's unpack that on an international level. There was an international court case, which you can look up the court documents. To answer your question, though, what it did was reduce the predator's ability to operate so that for the rest of my childhood, things were less bad than they had been for children before. So fast forward all the way to the time I'm 19. I've always been an A-type personality. I also had really good survivor skills. Again, I'm speeding up so much here, as you can imagine. But I was good at just kind of going along to get along. And I was also really good at being very productive and making a lot of money for the cult. Like I said, in the 10 rules, I had I had a little more independence, meaning I could leave the house more often to go fund. Okay. So by then I had more access to the outside world, is my point. And I started asking a lot more questions. My mind's very analytical, right? So earlier in my youth, I would ask a lot of hard questions, and you're given all these gaslit, bullshit answers, right? By that time, again, I could also ask more questions of people from the outside world. And I was starting to understand that maybe blue could be blue, and that not everyone who thinks blue is miserable and terrible and evil and all these things I had been. So I started deprogramming a little bit of the mindset that I had been given. And then I started asking questions internally within the cult that to me were very logical, and I was shut down, right? That being said, I just realized, honestly, how inefficient what we were doing was. Now, again, at the time, it was not nearly as abusive. It was much more just like Christian fundraising and so-called missionary work, okay? So it really wasn't some heroic escape. It was more that I was in Guadalajara, Mexico at the time. I told the place I was staying in the cult that I was going to go on some trip. And basically, I just went and took all my stuff. I put my whole suitcase on an overnight bus in Mexico, took a bus up to Monterrey, Mexico, it was like 10 hours. And I was offered a job up there from a friend. So I had an opportunity and I took it. And basically I just left and did not come back. And of course they tried to, hey, are you coming back? And I just didn't. So it was more like finding the opportunity. But the thing I want to draw out from that lesson is, a lot of people don't realize that there's really no safe place for survivors. So escaping, right, that can mean a lot of different things. But like take 8-year-old me in Brazil. Even if I were to get past the adults and the guard dogs and all the, the compoundists, security and then literally scale the wall with the glass at the top. Like, okay, let's say I could physically escape this compound. Not sure what that would look like for a child, but would I be safer in the streets of Brazil? Right? No. So where would I have gone if I would have escaped? They would have returned me back to my parents who are the abusers. So all that to say, there's a lot of misconception about, what that even means for a child specifically, but even people that are in these very isolated, controlled environments like cults and trafficking situations.
Well, also when you're 8 years old or young, you're even if you're 14 or 15, and this is all you've known your whole life, it probably doesn't. You probably don't have the skills logically to say, "I'm going to get out," and you don't really know where to go, right? I mean, I feel like, especially like an 8-year-old, doesn't know how to survive on the streets.
So to your point, not to mention, like, I don't exist on paper and I'm a foreigner in a foreign country, right? Like, probably not a safe place. But okay, I was in Houston, Texas from the age of 10 to 14 years old. So I remember being 11 years old, 11 and 12, and my sister and I are discussing how we can run away tonight. Many nights for many years. So, but to your point, right, even in Houston, Texas, where I'm a little safer, I guess, because I'm in the United States, the cops would have picked me up and returned me to my parents. I'd end up somewhere worse. So it's not even Stockholm syndrome or like the brainwashing aspect as much as where is the safe place for these kids to go? Our society, our judicial system is just not set up to actually protect the innocent, unfortunately.
And we'll be right back. Okay, and now back to the show. At what point did you know when you were a kid, like, and you talked a little bit about it, maybe that was the point but when was the point that you knew that your life was not normal?
Oh, we knew our life was not normal because we were told we were like the chosen special ones. You know what I mean? So we knew our life was different. And also being foreigner in third world countries, you're different. You're being stared at because you're different. You know what I mean? There's never, we never thought we were not different. But growing up, we were told we were like the chosen. We were told we were God's end time army. I'm very dark humor. Okay. Wow. It was also an apocalyptic cult. So we, as children, we literally had the weight of the world on our shoulders. Just know, again, I can quote the Bible to you, but the whole like blood is on thy hands if you don't save their soul things was like a real burden that we really had, we felt that pressure. So to your point, things were never normal. I guess we can talk about when I knew things were, not safe or bad, but that, I don't expect people to relate to experiencing that for your entire childhood. So I guess let me flip that script, right? Being surrounded by 100 people who aren't safe, right? When there's not one safe adult, when every other kid is in the same environment as you, right? There's a lot of people hurting people of all ages here. But this is the only environment you know. So there were some people that were more mean, more violent, more abusive than others, right? And that kind of becomes part of your survivor instincts. You walk into a room and it's not about, is it safe? It's like, how unsafe right now? What mood are they in and who are they targeting? And how can I not be that target, right? Dark humor. But again, you develop a lot of hyper awareness and survival skills that served me at the time. But again, it's incredibly unhealthy for any child.
Was there ever in a time where there was, an adult or, I'll just say an adult that was part of this compound or wherever you were living that made you feel maybe there was a chance of safety or feeling a little safe? Like, I don't know, like, was there a grandmother type that was there? And
there were definitely people, like, for people to understand, okay, the environment was very abusive, right? Everyone had to follow similar rules and structures and perpetuate this whole red is blue thing. Okay. So you can talk about spiritual, mental, emotional abuse as a whole. Okay. Yeah. But the adults, right? They all perpetuated all of that. Now, I'm not saying every adult sexually abused me or even physically abused me. Many adults did, right? But to your point, I wouldn't consider any adult safe or like a good parent to raise your child in a cult. But there were definitely adults that I remember more fondly because they were truly just, again, not super aggressive and violent towards me, not abusive specifically. And if I told these stories, these are such nothing burgers, but like they were just not terrible. Let's put it that way. Like the
Yeah.
acts of kindness was like, they snuck me some food. Sorry, dark humor, but like, anyways, that's the answer to your question.
I just can't even imagine how you're such a survivor, first of all. Like, you have to like understand that. And I want to get into, in just a few moments, I want to get into some of the things that you're working on today. But I understand where you're coming from. I get the description. It's so hard to imagine that people would want to do this and live like this. Like, it's so hard to comprehend.
Yeah.
And I guess maybe I should be able to comprehend it better in today's world.
You're not evil or psychotic. I don't think anyone who is not evil or psychotic could comprehend it. Now, again, understanding the patterns is not the same thing as justifying the abuse. I'm big on helping people understand the problem, not justifying it. But if we can't solve a problem we don't understand. There's a lot of people too, which is why I appreciate hosts like you who are willing to host this message and amplify this truth, right? There's a lot of people that are unwilling to even acknowledge the truth. And might I say, it's often the Christians who feel uncomfortable that I'm talking about lived experience, but more importantly, raising awareness and exposing the systemic corruption that's thriving today. Because my message is not about like, oh, I'm sad and broken, feel sorry for me. No. It's, hey, context, I have lived experience. Anyway, what I do today is this, and here's how you can help, right? So there's a lot of cognitive dissonance we need to get around. And I think my petite smiley female and dark humor, vibe kind of helps people connect with that in a way that's less intimidating, I think.
Yeah. How are your siblings today? Are they living fulfilled, normal lives at this point?
I don't share other people's stories, if you will. I'm going to answer that question more generally because we have tens of thousands of peers around the world who were born and raised in this cult. So again, I'm very close to my siblings. The short answer is no, we're not all okay. There are many people that are not all okay. And I'm talking about people in their 50s and 60s. We're only talking second generation because the first generation is on their own, okay? We're talking second and third and sometimes maybe fourth generation. No, not everyone's okay. There's a huge rate of people unaliving themselves. There's a massive rate of all kinds of mental health issues. There's people who have never been able to have children because of the abuse they experienced when they were children. So I'm grateful that, a lot of us are thriving. Obviously, this is not a sob story. There are a lot of us who are thriving in our own way, and that can mean so many different things. And I love seeing my peers find what lights them up, whatever that is for them. But for sure, one of my big motivations has been losing a lot of peers.
When you hear about what's happening with the whole Epstein case, and it seems like it's not going away anytime soon, and you hear about all the sexual abuse and sex trafficking and just all that stuff, I mean, talk to me about your feelings when you're hearing these stories that makes the whole world or most of the world sick to their stomach.
Disclaimer to anyone that sees me laughing and smiling at these really dark concepts, right? That's my chosen form of healing. The Epstein situation is such an interesting case study. And I smile because I've been talking about this for years. In fact, years ago, I interviewed Nick Bryant, who's one of the investigative journalists who originally unleashed this story. And he was actually the one who published the Black Book many decades ago, which is in fact more information than our current government has seen fit to expose. Now, Nick Bryant was also behind the Franklin scandal, and people should research that because it's kind of Epstein 101 many decades ago. Same, where it's U.S. politicians, mostly little boys, unfortunately. So I'm trying to summarize my response here. I'm hyper aware of the systemic corruption and how intentional it is that this industry of child exploitation and trafficking is thriving in the United States. Did you know globally we're the number one problem? Did you know we're the biggest source and destination for child trafficking? But wait, there's more. We're talking, globally there's human trafficking. Always humans can be trafficked. Narrow that down to globally child trafficking. Always children can be trafficked. We're talking labor and sex trafficking and organs and all these forms of trafficking. Narrow globally down to the United States of America. Narrow down all the ways children can be trafficked down to child sex trafficking. Years ago, it was confirmed to be at $56 billion every year in the United States. That's disgusting. That's more than all professional sports combined. For context, McDonald's and Costco sell less than $25 billion a year in products globally. Okay, that's disgusting. Now, more recently, it was confirmed at $76 billion every year. So we know it is the fastest growing criminal enterprise on the planet. And in the United States alone, I'm just quantifying this problem because then I want to get back to some rhetorical questions, okay? Here's one. Here's one I've been asking for a long time. And just real quick, this is much bigger than red versus blue or who's currently the puppet and the talking head on, know, thriving for so many more administrations, decades, etc. And the short version is both parties are the problem. Okay, so just that's where I'm at. But just to give some further context here, this situation could not be thriving without the intentional support. And let me explain to support that comment. Here's a rhetorical question for you. Why don't we have a federal agency that's dedicated to combating human trafficking?
Yeah, makes no sense.
Real quick, because we got a lot of, did you know we have agencies for water and agency for water and education, not for human trafficking? So said honestly, why aren't they even pretending to care? Because we know the war on drugs, and there's been so many politicians that have gotten a lot of votes and supports pretending to care. And it's not working so well, but they're pretending to care. Why has no presidential candidate ever mentioned child trafficking on the presidential debate stage? It's almost like they're too cowardly and corrupt to even gain voter support over something that would unite us all. Because if I was their campaign manager, I'd be like, pretend to care about children, right? That'd be a good talking point. No, they're too cowardly and corrupt. Prove me wrong. So to get back to your question, it's horrific how much evidence we have of our government aiding and abetting child trafficking. And the amount of cognitive dissonance it's taken for people to dance in circles with excuses as to why we no longer care about truth and justice, despite the evidence, despite the survivor testimonies and stories, despite the names and contact information and money trails and billions of dollars being passed around. I mean, it's almost like they're all in on it.
So when we're talking about, the United States being the top country where this is happening. So let's just say that I am the leader of a sex trafficking scheme and I have 10 kids and I'm just, I'm sure it's that you don't just have 10 kids, you have, a whole network of kids, but let's just say I have 10 kids. Who's the people that are wanting these children though? Like that's what's crazy to me. Like, is it just a rich billionaire that is like, oh yeah, I want the kid? Or, because
logical question, and congratulations, you're not evil or psychotic. And I mean that. And again, appreciate my dark humor on this very critical matter. To answer your question, okay, first, let's say there's been a lot of conspiracy theories that have really spun this web of misinformation. So that's not helping. More specifically, no, it's definitely not just the ultra wealthy. In fact, I know survivors of trafficking, for context, who were trafficked in the United States as children, who were trafficked to mansions and trailer parks in the same day. So it's about, let's use economic terms, okay? There is a aspect of supply and demand.
Okay.
However, there are so many different ways children can be trafficked. Number one, this is not a one-size-fits-all problem. There's not one-size-fits-all solutions. It's quite a complex problem. That means it doesn't look one way. So it could be anything from the druggy mom selling their child for their next fix to the more organized enterprises, which to your point could range from tens to tens of thousands of children. It could be the cult, the churches, the fronts of religion or good guys doing good things, including nonprofits who claim to combat trafficking. A lot of people pose as they're part of the solution when they're actually part of the evil. Everything I'm talking about is obviously from lived experience and stuff I know way too well that I'm summarizing here, right? But to answer your question, there's not one way it looks, which makes it difficult to combat. Did you know that familial trafficking is actually the number one most reported form of trafficking in America? Families trafficking their own children. So statistically, just to explain something else, there's a nasty spectrum of child abuse, which is all types of bad things to children, okay? There's a separate spectrum of child trafficking because 100% of trafficking is abuse, but not all abuse is trafficking, okay? just for context.
Okay.
Now, generally speaking, with child abuse, specifically child sexual abuse, it's statistically over 96% of the time someone the child knows and is supposed to be able to trust. It's not the unmarked white van and a man with a mask. Most of the time, of course, it happens in many ways. Most of the time, it's someone the child knows. It can be similar with child trafficking, where, again, familial trafficking is the number one most reported. Just realize the data is very sparse and often inaccurate. Traffickers ain't filing taxes. Okay, so that being said, this can happen in many different ways. One of the things I do when I'm training law enforcement is helping them understand the problem, which is such an understatement, because there's correcting the premise, which is so necessary, right? There's a difference between consensual sex work and sex trafficking. There's a difference with minors. There's a difference with, all these aspects of different realms of society and communities. Then in your local area, what could it look like there? What's the crime like there? Who's running the streets? Like, there's a lot of things that have to be sort of tailor-made to the environment, to the area, and to the scale at which we're dealing with.
We'll be right back after a word from our sponsors. Okay, now back to the show. One of the things you said was that, it could be multiple things, labor or sex that these kids are being trafficked for, but you also said something about organs. So are they like taking these children's organs from them?
There's many forms of many different types of bad things. Organ harvesting, organ trafficking is absolutely a thing in terms of crime and what we look at, globally, right? As far as in the United States, yes, it's a thing. Now, again, I talk about what I know, and I reference data that's been verified, knowing it's very sparse and inaccurate.
Yeah.
So the real answer is no one knows the real numbers, whether we're talking about the amount of children, the amount of money, the types of ways, or the percentage of, if you look at it like a pie chart, we can estimate a lot based on available data, but it's very sparse. And to your point, I think it depends more on the environment or like the type of crime. The other aspect is that generally it's not one type of crime happening in an isolated situation. Generally, there are multiple types of crime, whether that's trafficking with narcotics, with other types of substances, right?
Yeah.
Multiple types of trafficking. It's very common for children who are being, for example, labor trafficked to also be sex trafficked or at least sexually abused, right? So again, unfortunately, anyone who's evil and psychotic enough to profit off child exploitation, specifically in this very systematic way, best believe they don't have a moral conflict with, layering multiple types of crime in that instance.
I guess I just don't understand why somebody would want a 12-year-old and they're going to pay for this when why don't you just go and get an 18-year-old that you could like.
Such a great question. Okay, these are all logical questions, and I mean that, right? Part of my dark humor laugh is because I think you have to be evil and psychotic to justify it, to understand it. Unfortunately, it's happening and it's thriving. But to further answer your question,
because what I mean is you could get an 18-year-old girl that came from, I don't know, a bad family background, lives in a trailer park. I'll just use that as a stereotype example. And she doesn't have anything. She grew up with nothing, but she could be very pretty. And some rich guy could take her and give her everything or give her a little bit. And she'd probably be very happy to do whatever he wanted, and no matter what age or who he is. And I just don't know why they have to have, I guess they're pedophiles. That's why. I guess I kind of just answered my own question away. But why can't you just get the 18-year-old instead of the 12-year-old?
So I'll give you my opinion on this. And it's obviously research and experience. Again, it's a good question. The reason, this problem in general, right? Not to understand that's the demand like you're asking about, but more in general, we can pick one of two answers, right? Is this problem of child exploitation thriving in America? Is it incompetence? Or is it intentional? Okay, my answer is that it's intentional. If it's incompetence, that's still a problem. It's still unacceptable. But one is do we not have a federal agency because we're that stupid, or is it because it's important? Okay, so my point is, number one, it's very protected. So that's a whole dark realm industry.
Yeah.
But let me go here with the psychology. Okay, I rarely make sweeping statements. This one's true. 100% of the time, someone who would hurt a child is a weak, pathetic coward. 100% of the time. I'm not talking about discipline or losing your temper. I'm talking about a man or woman who would abuse a child. 100% of the time is a weak, pathetic coward. Let me explain. There's the concept of hurt people hurting people. None of this is to justify what they're doing. It's to understand the psychology of a person who was likely hurt as a child, hurt in their life, bullied, whatever the point is. It's very similar to why children hurt animals, right? It's that aha, got you moment. It's overpowering something vulnerable, and they are too cowardly to pick on someone their own size. I'm talking about child predators, right? That, again, whatever that weakness, whatever that desire is coming, they're craving empowerment, but they are too weak, pathetic, and cowardly to attain real empowerment. So there's somewhat of this quick fix where overpowering a vulnerable person or animal gives them that aha feeling of power. As we know, that's not real or sustainable power. So it becomes something they have to continually do to get their quick fix. It is a serial predation. It's not a mistake. It's not something up one day. It's a serial predation.
A friend and I were talking about, people that abuse children just this past week. And, one of the things, this is kind of, and I think this is exactly what should happen. If you get caught abusing a child, I think you should be chemically castrated.
I agree with you. I absolutely agree with you. I think we need much harsher punishments for perpetrators. And the irony, though, you asked about Epstein. See, if our leadership ain't even taking it seriously, and if they can't be held accountable, even though their names are circled, I mean, it's difficult to picture a world where we, the people, could at our ground level implement justice when at the leadership level there's so much blatant corruption. But to your point, that's what needs to happen.
Yeah. Or you could say you can be chemically castrated, or you spend your entire life in solitary confinement. Like you
I like both of those. I like the chemical castration as well as removing the hand digits, both as a visual representation as well as a further safeguard.
Yeah. I want to talk about what you're doing today, because what you went through, as a child, as a young adult, has now seems like it has brought you to where you are today. So tell me about, you talked about your training police, you have Digital Defenders United. A lot of this stuff is taking place online, the sex trafficking and stuff. So tell me about who you are today and what you're doing. Because I think I know it because I've researched you, and I think it's amazing and fascinating, and I want you to tell my audience about it.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It is the honor of a lifetime to be able to fight back in this way, and specifically to bully bad guys.
Yeah.
So I am officially, I'm the CMO and the director of anti-trafficking at a place called The Ranch, Texas. It's ranchtx.org. We are a government and law enforcement tactical training facility. So it's a tier 1 facility. There's a lot of history here. The point is, today we do a lot to train local, state, and federal law enforcement. Now, I could get into that for hours. In general, it's the opposite of what people think. The better training they have, the better decisions they'll make under pressure. So we actually need more and better training in general for law enforcement. That's another subject. Specific to combating child exploitation and trafficking, it's actually very sad, and every law enforcement officer will agree with me, how little to no information they have to even understand this, much less protocol to know what to do. I've heard so many horror stories, doing a lot of undercover work and sting ops. I've seen so much incompetence that I had such a passion to get involved and help to educate. Now, let's acknowledge something, right? It shouldn't be me. Really shouldn't be me. A few years ago, I realized I escaped this cult at 20, fast forward to 30. Actually, I was 29. I was doing really good things in the world. I was running multiple businesses, doing things I'm very proud of. I did one of my businesses. We did a lot of awareness campaigns, and we did one about the missing and murdered Indigenous women. And that was my first 360 reintroduction into this crazy corruption that I was not aware of was thriving today in our country. So I was horrified. I was like, why is nobody talking about that? It lit this fire under me and it compelled me to understand more about what's happening today. And obviously I was, trying to find out how to help and work. I worked with a lot of different nonprofits in many different realms, both on the awareness and education side. I did a lot of sting ops and undercover work. So again, I educated myself a lot. I spent a few years really understanding the problem and also seeing a lot of the incompetence and corruption that I did not expect to find specifically in the anti-trafficking nonprofit world. Oof, that's a whole podcast in itself, but there's a lot of people posting as the solution.
The Indigenous women story is a podcast in itself as well.
There's so many segments of society. So I'm trying to speed it up. I'm trying to summarize it here. All that to say, I lit this fire under me to want to help. after wading through, wanting to essentially work with other people that I thought were effective and seeing how ineffective a lot of this is, how competitive and territorial and anyway, profit driven a lot of it is, I decided not that we needed a new nonprofit, but I started a new nonprofit, first of all, to pull out from some things I did not want to be a part of, but also to unite the experts, not around fundraising or fame, right? But I saw this need for cohesive conversations between different realms that aren't talking, right? We're talking law enforcement and legislators and tech companies, platforms, digital, innovations, survivors, NGOs, like we need to talk, and there's so many layers of this problem. We need a comprehensive strategy. So all that to say, I dug in many different realms. I do a lot in the world of combating digital exploitation because there's so many problems we, the people, can solve there. The short version is it's so unregulated, it's so borderless, and most kids spend the majority of their time on these screens today, unfortunately, and predators know that. And I've, short version, done a lot of undercover work pretending to be a child on the internet. I've seen things I can't unsee. I know for sure children are not okay, and how just aggressive and pervasive the predation is. So everything from your local pervs, just, I'm creating a profile with zero entrapment. I'm just creating a profile and I'm flooded by local pervs where we make arrests, etc., all the way up to actual, trafficking and various forms of exploitation. So like I said, beyond that, we're doing law enforcement training at the ranch. And it's such an honor to, first of all, be able to correct the premise and give real information, but then also offer specialized training. Because in law enforcement, the patrol officer needs different information than the ICAC detective and investigator, different also than the SWAT guy who's kicking down the door, right? So it's not about pretty charts and numbers. It's about actionable information and real world results, not fundraising or credit.
Yeah. Do you stop and think about like the training that you're giving people and the work that you're doing now? Do you ever kind of stop for a moment and just reflect on that and think about, I went through a lot of bad shit growing up. I had a lot of moments that most people wouldn't survive through that you did. And that's, what I said earlier, you're such a survivor. You're such an inspiration to people. And hopefully you know that. But do you ever stop and think about all the amazing work that you're doing now and how many lives that you're impacting and helping? Do you ever think about that?
I definitely reflect often, and, connecting to all of that in nature is like really, my ideal zen. So I do a lot of reflection, and there's a lot of incredible moments. Like to your point, I probably don't stop and realize the impact because there's a lot of impact that I can't see and don't take credit for. But for sure, there are so many incredible moments and meetings and people the public will never know about, and things happening behind the scenes, and things being built by the real heroes that, again, are not in it for fame. So there's been so many incredible moments. Like, I know I was literally born for this shit.
Yeah. If you want people listening to this to take away one thing, what would it be?
There's so much we the people can do. I want to make it impossible for people to keep doing nothing. My message to everyone is to pick 5 kids near you and promise me it won't be them. It's not about this heroic idea of combating evil. It's about doing what you can. Normally, that means start where you are.
That's amazing. I am so happy and glad. And this conversation, I'll just say I don't get super emotional usually during podcasts, but there was a moment where I thought I was going to get emotional when you were talking, because you make it reality. What you're saying is things that I didn't go through that, so I've heard about it, but you really made it where it's so digestible and it's what you went through. You've done a great job kind of explaining that. And I just want to thank you for being on and telling your story, and just thank you for doing what you're doing to help educate people. It's sad that we live with leadership in this country and the world that's a part of this. I think the Epstein whole case could be a blessing in disguise in some ways, because it could drive people to want to take action, and maybe there will be an agency one day about trafficking, human trafficking, child trafficking.
I'm actually recommending the federal government solve this problem. To your point, I don't think it'd be effective. It's more about the fact that it's exist.
Yeah. But, I think that my overall feeling is that I just think that maybe there's a reason all this happened, that all these things happened, that Epstein got caught, and all these people that went through the abuse and their lives were ruined. Hopefully, there'll be something amazing that comes out of that, so it won't happen to other people. Is my hope.
I agree with that. I think it's actually the opportunity of a lifetime. And for the people who think it might not affect them, I want them to think about it like, if we allow our government to get away with this,
Yes.
just know your grandchildren will absolutely feel the impact of that. If this doesn't drive us to demand accountability and justice, we have to recognize then that truth no longer matters to us. Like, as long as people are willing to acknowledge that they don't want to know, okay, I don't want to see anybody continuing to pretend like we don't know. We have plenty of evidence. So now we have a choice. We can do something or do nothing. But we will be the generation with a very unique fork in the road opportunity to decide what side of history we're going to be on. And I know what side I'm on.
Kim, tell me the name of your website again so people can go. And I'll also put it in the description of this video or podcast also.
Absolutely. Thank you. So you can find a lot of internet safety resources, free information, and tools on digitaldefendersunited.org. We're also all over social media. We do a lot to educate the public and put out checklist-style resources to help your kid stay safe in today's digital world.
I love that. And I'll put a link to your I love your TikTok. Obviously, that's how I found you. And you are, I just think, an amazing person, and I'm so happy that you agreed to come on and talk with me. And so thank you so much, everybody, for listening. Thank you, Kim, for being on. And visit Kim's website, visit her TikTok, send her a message, and educate your children, right? I mean, that's what we have to start doing.
Thank you again for being one of the few who are brave enough to stand for the truth. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for being on, Kim. And if this episode resonates with someone that you think it would resonate with, please share it and be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. Thanks, everybody, for listening.